We shouldn't recite the passages of Korbanot or the chapter of Ezil Mikuman while it's still technically night, because during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim didn't start the daily sacrifices until it was daylight. The Torah specifically says that the sacrifices should be brought during the day. According to the pre-MEGADIM, if someone is pressed for time and he knows he won't be able to recite passages of Korbanot during the day, he may still in fact recite it at night. The only thing to consider is not adding the parts where we ask HaShem to accept these as sacrifices, since they aren't offered at night. The HIDA says that there's no issues when it comes to reciting passages of Korbanot at night, that it's no different than any other Torah verses. However, he still considers it better to recite it during the day at its proper time. Unfortunately, since today we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, and we aren't allowed to offer any sacrifices outside of it, when studying the topic, it's viewed in heaven as if it was offered in its proper place at its proper time. So for those who have to pray Shachrit very early, so that they can make it to work on time, can rely on the poskim who ruled that dawn is approximately 90 minutes before sunrise, and they may in fact recite Korbanot at that time. If it's recited any earlier than this, however, the obligation will not be fulfilled. When it comes to Shabbat, Yom Tov, and Korbanot, we stick to the same regimen of Korbanot and Ezil Mikuman, the same way it's done on weekdays, since the sacrifices were offered on those days as well. Although Ezil Mikuman describes many Korbanot that may not be offered on Shabbat, we don't recite it in substitute for the offerings, but rather as a fulfillment of Torah study in general. The custom is to remain seated when saying the Shachrit Korbanot. If someone prays with the congregation, where everyone remains seated, when he actually has the custom of standing, he has to follow the custom of that place in order not to be guilty of showing off that he is more pious than others. Any situation like this should always be avoided. The Talmud teaches that if someone offered a korban while seated, his korban isn't valid. And since we recite these passages in place of the offering, it makes sense to say that it should be recited while standing. YEHUDA maintains that this is an act of piety and isn't necessarily required. The rule to stand was strictly instituted for the Kohen performing the actual sacrifice. The Chida's ruling is that Torah scholars of Yerushalayim always recited the Korbanot while seated. If someone wishes to recite Korbanot after Shachrit, he may stand without fear of seeming haughty. Women can and is commendable for them to recite the Korbanot section of Shachrit as well. There are some opinions that suggest that it's not critical for Torah scholars who devote all their days to Torah study to recite the section of Korbanot of Shachrit. Yosef says that it's something that we shouldn't rely on, that every Torah scholar or yeshiva student should make sure to recite the entire Shachrit, beginning with the Akedah, Korbanot, and Ezil Mikuman. All the sacrifices were offered because of a transgression that was committed, with the exception of the Thanksgiving offering, which was brought without having committing any sin. The sages said, in the days of MaShiach, all offerings will cease, except for the Thanksgiving offering, which will continue forever. The only thing that will be left is the feeling of thanksgiving and gratitude to HaShem himself.